45 minutes. We've got to cover sex, among other things, and all major sex problems in 45 minutes. So, no, first, before we get into that, and that's not a tease, we're going to get into that, but before we get into that, I want to make a couple more comments about communication, about intimate communication. Notice that in the previous talk, I mentioned that Michael and I, after a conflagration, sat down. If you really want to talk intimately with somebody, it is almost essential that you sit down. There is a direct connection between the gluteus maximus and the eardrum. Somehow people whose behinds are in chairs listen better. They are not on the run, they're not going anywhere, they're listening. It also helps if you're in touch, like that. You see, just like that. I've always found that if I want to talk to somebody lovingly about something that matters, I touch their hands, I sit in front of them like that, eye level. Little kids or grown-ups. And you're in touch, you're close, you're talking directly to them, and you're seated. You're not running anywhere. That's important. Secondly, I think it's important to remember to speak only for oneself. Really critical. Those who have made a marriage encounter, and there's some present, know that one of the critical things you learned there was to stop using you language. You always, you never, you ought, you this, you that. The moment somebody says you always, you never, you ought, the first thing you do, if you have a normally organized ego, is raise your shield and lower your spear and say, what do you mean? I never talked to you anymore. I was talking to you a week ago Tuesday. You know, I remember doing it just before breakfast. What do you mean I'm a lousy lover? You're no great inspiration, you know. And I mean, we counterattack, you see, and then we don't get anywhere. There's no dialogue going on there. There's just attack and defense and counterattack and so on. So that becomes crucial. The other one is to remember that you'd rather have an understanding than be right. There are these people who get into dialogues and they're going to prove I'm right and you're wrong and I'm going to win this debate. And if I win, I'm married to a loser. That makes me feel great, doesn't it? I've just trumped you. I love you, so I'll walk all over you. I won, beat you. But really, we're not after winning or losing, and you'd be surprised how many people come into therapy and they're arguing issues that are 5 years old in front of me as if I'm going to decide, like some judge, who was right and who was wrong 5 years ago, and they've got two entirely separate versions of it. For one thing, he's male and she's female, so they're bound to have separate versions of it. You know, they're incompatible to begin with. You know, they have different views of the world. Different things are up front. At any rate, and I have to get them to stop doing that and to, you know, quit presenting evidence like they're in a court of law and look for understanding one another, standing under, upholding one another. You understand what I'm driving at? That notion that I'd rather be happy than right, and that what I want is an understanding with you, and that you don't have to agree with me. We're not going to agree on everything. In fact, it's our differences that brought us together. Why should they now divide us? Okay? It's very important to maintain some of those rules. I even had some notes on some of them that were rather cleverly done. Yeah. Only problem is I never use my notes that much. You know, instead of saying you're a louse, you can say I'm feeling hurt. That's a better example, isn't it? Yeah. Louse is another technical term we use a lot in therapy, like lousy and louse. But, you know, some people say, you don't love me anymore, instead of saying, you know, I'm feeling very unloved right now, or I'm feeling unlovable. Some people feel I'm unlovable at the moment, so they say, you don't love me. See, that's projection. And instead of, it's really important, I think, sometimes to look at the opinion or the attitude we've got and try to find the fear that's behind it and to express it as a fear. Right now I'm scared of, or whatever it is, you see. And to understand that if I do that, it robs the fear of its power. If you look at it carefully, you're going to find most of the things we're afraid of haven't happened. Think about it a minute. Fears are always of what hasn't happened. If it's happened, you're coping with it one way or the other. Bad, well, indifferently, but it hasn't happened generally. I'd like to do something right now in terms of all this. I'd like you to spend a minute taking a nice deep breath, getting relaxed, and paying attention to what your body feels like at the moment, how you're feeling at the moment. Don't go to sleep just because you've had lunch. This may be Southern California, and you may have had lunch, but we're not in for a siesta yet. Okay, but actually center yourself a little bit, take a nice deep breath, kind of get in touch with how your body feels, and then what you're telling yourself about how your body feels, or about what's going on so far. You know, in other words, get in touch with your feelings for the moment, your body sensations and your feelings. Take a minute to do that. Now, having done that, turn to the person on your left or right, pair off a bit, right where you are, and one of you share your feelings with the other one, and then shut up and let the other one share his or her feelings with you. Go ahead and do that, will you please? But keep it on the feeling level. Now, if the second person hasn't spoken yet, let the second person talk. Okay, everybody done that? That's intimacy. That's intimacy. The reason I need to tell you that is there are people who go around there who try to overcomplicate it. You know, that's what the gentleman meant that I quoted this morning who said, I tried to be intimate, nobody told me how. Now, nobody can leave this room and said they don't know how. Because intimacy is getting in touch with your own feelings and your own sensations of the moment in the here and now and sharing them with somebody else. And then the reciprocal thing of listening to them share yours. Doesn't even mean commenting on it or anything else. It just means that sharing right there. You just took a first step towards intimacy. Everybody still with me? Yeah, basic lesson in it. Nobody ever teaches you that. You know, you go to school and they talk communication arts. When I was in grammar school, they taught us English. This was known as a communication skill. Now, most of us spoke American, so we didn't get good grades in English. And then, we had a devil of a time with a thing called grammar, you know, things like that. And then later you get into junior high or high school and they teach you public speaking. That's the other communication art. And there aren't too many dining rooms in private homes, there aren't too many bedrooms in private homes where there is a podium. So most of us never learned how to communicate on the intimate level. And basically we pick it up willy-nilly. And it's really useful to pay attention to that. Okay, I got rid of the fallacy of trying to win an argument. That'll take care of that. So really, if we want to communicate well, it starts out with that getting acquainted with me, getting acquainted with where I'm coming from, getting acquainted with what's going on in me, and then trying to overcome those obstacles I raise to intimacy, the fears I have, sometimes getting rid of them by just expressing them. It helps a lot to lower the barriers, just to say, I'm scared of this. See? Like Jennifer coming in and saying, don't you know I have this fear of abandonment, you know? And then once she says that, the air clears, you see, because she's got a label for it, and she knows how to handle that. Well, similarly, in our personal relationships, we can do that. Okay. It's crucial to understand, particularly in the intimacy of the marital relationship, that what we're involved in is an adventure of the future together, in a thing called a covenant of intimacy, which is an agreement to get to know one another. So it's all about, that's going to take the rest of our lives. Because there is no day on which I can say, I know you. There's no day on which because you don't know you. You know what I mean? I'm learning me all the time. You know, people out there, they say, I'm looking forward to your next talk. And I said, me too. You know? Because, I've got notes there, but I'd bore me if I read them. But the point is, if I can surprise me, you can surprise me, right? And we're constantly in the task of getting to know one another, and if we're involved in a committed relationship, which is of the essence for true intimacy, we need commitment. Why? Because if I'm really going to give myself away to you, I have to have some guarantee from you, you're not going to casually drop me. I've given myself away and you drop me, then I'm going to be really hurt. So we need commitment, and we need that sense that there's going to be a future to our relationship, so I'm not just, being thrown aside, and we need to be able to trust one another. Why? Well, if I don't trust you, I'm not going to hand myself over, because I'm rather fragile. You see? So that trust is of the essence. Okay, and that's one of the great casualties that occurs in a marital relationship when one party has been unfaithful. It has far less to do with sexual activity than it has to do with the lies that went along to cover it up. The person who has an affair immediately has a problem. Not just from the affair, but I mean in terms of what's going to happen now in the relationship. Because if I'm married to you and I have an affair, if I tell you, it's going to destroy where we are with one another, right? It's going to, woo, you're not going to like it very much. No, unless you're odd. And then, too, if I keep it secret, what have I just done? I am no longer able to share myself totally with you because I have a secret. See? So I have a barrier. Furthermore, if I'm going to do you damage, I have to decide it's your fault. So I'll build higher barriers. I'll begin to project upon you all the reasons why I've had to do this bad thing. And there goes our intimate relationship. And so very often when I've had to deal with people who've had an affair and had to deal with they've decided to stay married and work this out, the real work has to be done on how do you reestablish trust. And one of the casualties that occurs, which is how we segue into, you're going to see how neatly I do this, right into sex, see? One of the casualties that occurs in regard to that is very often what I call the phantom lover syndrome. Because what happens is, I've had again and again, say a wife who has been fully orgasmic and enjoyed their love life, who now no longer enjoys their love life since he had that affair. Why not? Well, you all know why not. Because when they're in the midst of doing whatever they're doing, and not everybody is a sexual gymnast, some do it rather sedately, but if whatever they're doing, she remembers the other gal. Boom. There goes pleasure. Did he do this with her? Da-da-da-da-da. And so the past comes in, and there goes the immediate pleasure of the present. Because, one, the trust that was demolished, where we were in an exclusive relationship with one another has been demolished, and this phantom, what I call the phantom lover. And it works the other way, too. I had a non-orgasmic male, married 27 years. His wife didn't know he was non-orgasmic. We discovered that when I said, well, how's your love life? And he said, well, I only do it to please her. I don't get anything out of it. And I said, well, you're non-orgasmic, huh? His wife said, oh, no, I said, you mean he ejaculates? Oh, yeah. I said, but that's not an orgasm. See, I told you, men get to fake it better. Yeah, they have this physiological response. But for some of them, it has about as much emotional significance as spitting. Nothing. No, not there. Why? Because they short-circuit their pleasure. Well, the same thing goes when you're talking about non-orgasmia. Yeah, we got to talk about non-orgasmia. You know, they used to only talk about women in this regard, and Freudians called them frigid. Yeah, like they were icebergs. Yeah, I'm going to hurry, you'll go down like the Titanic. And then some doctors who were married to women who didn't have orgasms realized they weren't frigid. They were nice, affectionate, lovely human beings who were wonderful companions and all the rest. And they said, oh, we've got to give them a better name. So they said they were anorgasmic. Wow. Sounds like terminal asthma. Oh, you've got anorgasmia, have you? Wow. Hey. The non-orgasmic person, though, and they always referred only to females. And it was one of the best kept secrets until I wrote Delivering the Male and the Joy of Marriage. In both of those, I give away secrets. I'm always giving away secrets. I go tell pubescent boys exactly what they're feeling, and they say, he knows, and he's telling everybody, you know, telling the girls in the room, too. The people who are short-circuiting themselves in this area, 95% of them have nothing physiological wrong with them. Not a thing. It has to do with their own understanding of where they are in this relationship. Because the sexual act is a great big zero. Here we go again. Another zero. I told you, all of mine are zeros. It's a nothing. It's a zero. It's a zilch. It has no meaning. It has no content. It has no emotional, moral, theological, whatever significance just by being what it is, you see. I mean, you can talk about the teleological end of it, and you can talk about what it was intended to be in nature, you can talk about all kinds of things, but as a particular human action right now between two human beings, it doesn't have any meaning just by being what it is. A penis entering a vagina, it's meaningless. There are people now who say he's tired. It's been a long day for him. Because they figure it's at least a snort in the loins. But what I'm talking about is that this is a communications medium. See? And it gets its meaning just as the words that we talked about earlier get their meaningfulness from what meaning we bring to them. We fill them with meaning. We fill this with meaning. And that's why this very same physiological anatomical act is capable of being on one extreme rape and at the other extreme making love. On this extreme, it's second only to murder. On this extreme, it literally commits the miracle of creating more love in the world. And it's everything in between. In any relationship of any duration, it's everything in between. Where does it get its meaningfulness? It gets its meaningfulness from what we mean to each other, from what we mean it to mean, from where we're at, from how we deal with our own bodies, how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about this other person. That all comes into play, which is why it's always different, even if it's only 25 minutes later. I turned 60 last week, and it's 25 minutes between times if you're 60, okay? Now, okay. I told you I give away secrets all the time. I give away secrets. Okay, now, stick with me. So what was happening with this particular guy that I started telling you about, 27-year marriage, a handsome, dynamic, lovely man. Now, this, you might be interested in this because this couple had met at college. What she didn't know was he had invisible acne. By that I mean he had had such horrible skin condition all the way through his puberty and right up until just before he entered college that he made no friends. He was a withdrawn, shy guy. And when he entered college, so his skin had cleared up, but he was psychologically still this shy, withdrawn guy who never dated anybody, who was, very embarrassed by his skin and everything else. And he met her, and she thought he was wonderful because he wasn't a makeout artist. Okay? Despite the fact that he was a wonderfully handsome and dynamic fellow. And she had had one sexual exploit before marrying him, one weekend with some lout. And feeling that it was necessary for her, before they got married, to tell him about that, she did. And she had completely forgotten it. But in this particular session, when they came in for a different matter, about a communication situation, when they came in, and he made that remark about being and I said, "You're non-orgasmic," and she was stunned, because he was an aggressive, very successful salesman, and he said, "Well, I only do it to please her," and he did it very well. It was a nice performance, you see, delivering the goods, ringing the bell, whatever it was, performance mentality. And she was astonished to discover he didn't get anything out of it. And I said, "How do you short-circuit your pleasure?" And without thinking twice, he didn't say, "I don't know." He immediately said, "I think of that other guy." And she looked absolutely astonished. Now, they have a course in therapy school on peripheral vision, so you can talk to one person and see the other one. I didn't pass that course. I have a mirror. I do it with mirrors. It seems like magic, but I do it with mirrors. Now, I have an armoire in my room with a mirror on it, so when I'm talking to you, I can see the person sitting next to you. See? They don't know that. They think it's just an armoire. Give away another secret. So I could see that she was absolutely astonished. She said, "What other guy?" And he said, "The other guy you went away with for a weekend before you met me." She said, "I have never thought of him since the day I told you about him." But he did. Every single time he was trying, because he had been a shy guy with psychological acne, he was not, he was still carrying that around. He had made comparisons. He was still making comparisons in his brain. Every time he was making love to her, it would be short-circuited by the fact that he'd think, "I wonder if this other guy did it better," or something. The competition came in. Remember what I said about competitors and intimacy? There it goes. And very often that's what an affair does to a marriage too, even if the affair doesn't break up the marriage. The people then find themselves psychically, spiritually, if you will, emotionally disturbed by it, and they short-circuit their pleasure. But I really mean to tell you, the reason I'm even bringing this up is there are a lot of non-orgasmic males in our culture who do not really enjoy sex. Why not? And that's why they lay off. One of the major complaints in our time is they prefer to watch TV or the baseball game. They're always playing the game. Watch the game. That's a macho thing to do. Watch the game. Get in bed with your wife, and it's no fun anyway. Why not? Non-orgasmic. Why not? Well, a lot of reasons. One of them is the performance mentality. If I'm doing it to prove something to you about my prowess, you see, then what happens is I'm focusing entirely on your pleasure, supposedly, and it becomes a physiological activity. You know, and that's why women who involve their whole beings in this activity get concerned about these guys who are so interested in gymnastics. You still with me? The men are making it sort of physical, and the women are thinking an emotional, spiritual, intimate level. One of the things that happens is they've had an argument this morning, and yet he goes to work. They haven't resolved the argument. She's still carrying around the emotional residue of it. He comes home, and he expects to pinch her bottom and go to bed. They haven't made peace. How are they going to make love? From her point of view, and he wonders why she's carrying a grudge. See, I notice all the women here going, and the men sort of staring into space. What's he talking about? You know? What's he talking about? I can see it now. This is why we really have need to dialogue, because in our age, a number of things have happened. You see, John Wayne died a long time ago, and they no longer even name the airport after him. Okay? Humphrey Bogart's been dead a long time. John Garfield's been dead a long time. All of these guys who were the tough guys are dead. See? And the thing is that what's going on here is we have a new paradigm, a new understanding, a new schema, if you will, for the male-female relationship. The women's movement not only elevated the consciousness of women for the last 20 years, it's elevated the consciousness of some men. But unfortunately, about 80% of the men still are not there, so they're obsolete. See, they don't match the women. So the problem is here that we both have to come to a renewed appreciation of what the sexual activity in our marriage is about. It is really, if you're thinking in Christian terms, a communion. It is where we meet on a very intimate level that symbolizes our intimacy in all the other levels. It's a living out on that dynamic level of where we are with one another at this particular moment in our relationship. And that's why it's not just an activity that delivers some sort of physiological pleasure. It's an activity that gives my reassurance to you, to them, I belong to you, that we're together, whatever. And it's why the action itself is much less important than the attitude you and I take towards it. But you take, for example, take a man, when we're talking about anorgasmia and males for the moment, you take a guy who does everything very precisely. He catches this train, or he catches this plane every day, or whatever it is. He's got to be at the office and do this. He's got his appointments every time, you know, just like this, like this, like this. And he comes home at a certain time, and he does this on a routine, and he does this on a routine, and every Tuesday night he makes love to you. And it takes precisely 4.5 minutes. If you include prolonged foreplay, it'll take him 6.5 minutes. Now, he's going to be non-orgasmic. And the reason he's going to be non-orgasmic is he doesn't know anything about sensual pleasure. Why not? Because most males, if they're being John Wayne, feel that if you lay back and actually have some sensual experience, that's being female. Yeah, I see again, smiles. You recognize all that, right? Okay. So that men have not learned to receive. They feel if I'm passive that way and I allow her to massage me, or I allow her to in a sense, caress me and so on, that's being too feminine. I must be active. I must do things. And so they miss out on an awful lot. See, that's what I mean by obsolescence. They're still back to feeling that they're in some sort of role rather than just being themselves in relationship to the other. The same thing goes in terms of just a minute. I had here you get the workaholic who is achievement-oriented, goal-oriented. He's driven towards success and control and power out there. And I meet a lot of these people because I talk to a lot of corporate people who are high achievers. They bring somebody in like me, and then the tax write-off, see? They can have this big institute and give everybody a prize and have a wonderful time at the resort, and they say it's because they had this institute with Clayton Barbeau who taught them how to lessen the stress, you know, or something. Yeah, and it becomes a tax write-off. But my point about it is the workaholic who is goal-oriented that way leaves little room for relaxation because he's always on the go. He's always on the make. He's always got to achieve this. He's got to get that. And he's on, you know, there's very little room for being playful. Even if he goes out and plays tennis, it's competitive. He's going to win. If he's going out to golf, he'll break the clubs on the 9th hole if he hasn't lowered his par, you know, and all of this stuff, or beaten par. So then when they turn even their supposed recreational activities into work, then what happens is very often what is meant to be the joy of sex becomes another job. It becomes another achievement thing. I've got to do this, keep her happy, you know, and whatever, you know, they'll even put it on the schedule if necessary. Or they'll decide they're too busy because doing this is more important. I met a man the other day who told me he was on the road 200 days out of the year. See? I had occasion with one of the major corporations in this country to meet one of their top men, and he told me he hadn't been home in 3 months. For more than a few hours, he passed through his town a couple of times because of reorganizing this big merger thing went on, and he's been going around the country all the time. And these people have no love life. And so when they arrive home on a certain occasion, well, another job to be done. And they tend to be non-orgasmic. Because again, they look at it as a goal orientation. It has nothing to do with our communing with one another, of our being with one another, of our caressing one another, stroking one another, being tender and loving and present for one another in this way. You still with me? Yeah. Because and it's really crucial that we appreciate that. And when we talk in the Creating Family series, I had a whole hour-long thing on the sexual act and on all this nonsense about it, you know, indulging in foreplay, which is a technological thing, you know. Back in the 20s, nobody indulged in foreplay. They invented that in 1930. Back in the 20s, they canoodled. And in the 1880s, they furky-toodled, which was an awful lot more fun. And you ought to look those up. But I discussed all of that then. I want to hit some little different stuff here. It's like talking about sexual beauty. Do you know something? There are people who mistake physical youth or vogue looks for sexual beauty. Ain't where it's at. That's not where it's at. Sexual beauty is a certain energy level people radiate. And when they're 90 years old, they can still be radiating it. You know, if they're alive with a life force there that shows forth, and where they're being man or being woman in the world, they can be as sexy as any 19, probably more so than any 19-year-old, because they're comfortable in their own skin. One of the sexiest women I know is my age. You know, I've known her since she was 17. Gave her her first passionate kiss when she was 17. And she said, "You're not kissing me because I'm fey, you're kissing me because I'm a girl." Whew. I thought about that, and for years afterwards, I didn't kiss people just because they were girls. I waited until they were persons. And yeah, I did. Ruined a lot of things. These women went off, yeah. They would want to make out, and I'd say, "Well, I want to meet you as a person first," and they'd go get pregnant by somebody else. And yeah. And you know, I reminded her of that. I made a major speech back when I was about 30 years old to a women's college about not packaging themselves as products to be sold to men. I started the speech with that comment, and I told her about that. And she said, "You know, I don't remember saying that, but I do remember you never kissed me again." And I said, "Well, that's because I started going with Roberta." See, one of my main claims to fame is all my old girlfriends are still friends of mine. If they're still alive, they're still friends of mine. See, I love that idea. Yeah. And she said, "Oh, well, no, even if you had tried, I wouldn't have let you." And I said, "How come?" And she said, "Because I went in the front room when after that, I closed the door on you and I went in the front room and I collapsed on the sofa and said, 'Faye, you're not ready for this.'" I said, "Gee, you could have told me that. It would have put my psychosexual development ahead 6 years, you know." But that woman, who is a grandmother now, and who is not married, but who is a grandmother many times over, travels the world, is very active in her work, and gets proposed to about once a year. I kid you not. Why? I mean, she's no Vogue beauty. She's a lovely human being, but she radiates that uniqueness, she radiates that love of life, she radiates energy, and it has nothing to do with the fact that she's as old as I am, and I'm 102. Not really. I turned 60 last week, or April 11th, I think it was, yeah, in Singapore. But I hope you're aware of what I'm talking about. It's that liveliness that we generate that comes forth. It has nothing to do with whether or not one is getting bald or getting a patch or, I just put on 2 inches out there at lunch, or the chronological age. It has to do with a whole sense of being at home in one's own skin as man or woman in the world. you see, and being willing to be open to the life forces around one, to the energy around one. So here you have people who are workaholics who turn to another person as if this is either there's some plumbing to be done here, or this is an activity we have to engage in, another one of the chores to be done, and get this over with and get on with it. It's happening all the time. I have more complaints from women about their lack of sexual activity from their husbands, and we're talking mainly about high achievers here, than the reverse. And yet this is a society where people fantasize about sex. It's a pornographic society, which shows the ignorance we have about sex, because if we were less ignorant, we wouldn't be supporting a pornographic industry. They do a lot of fantasizing about it. We sell products by it, and yet very few people seem to be at home in terms of enjoying it. Or if you get somebody whose personal life, as I say, is regimented, then they'll regiment this too, and they will suppress or deny their emotional life in order to just accomplish this task here. They're task-oriented people. Or, as I say, you can have guilts. People with guilts out of the past, or people with a breakdown of trust in the relationship, they'll be non-orgasmic too. So we come back always to intimacy. That action can be no more intimate than we are being in the rest of our life together. It's not an intimate act between people who don't know one another. It doesn't make love unless we're making love. You know, people use a lot of terminology for it, but making love is the ultimate of that action. It's what it can mean when it's really a sacramental act that, in a sense, participates in God's love for all of us. That's the sign of the sacrament in Christian theology. Okay, and very often most people aren't making love; they're having sex, and one or the other may be just putting up with it, whether they're male or female, because they got to do this. It's expected of me. Another chore. God, I just took out the garbage too. Never stops. Somebody like Woody Allen can say, you know, my brain is only my second most favorite organ. But the fact of the matter is, where your head is at, where your brain is at, is going to have a lot to do with where your love life is at, where the sexual activity in a relationship is at. And that's why a lot of people who supposedly are making love aren't making love. They're using somebody. They're scoring. We have all kinds of terminology for it. They're getting laid, or they're screwing around. Getting laid is the passive side of screwing around. Those all signify different things. That's why we have so many different terms for it. And they all signify it because this action doesn't mean anything by itself. It gets that meaning from us. So if we want to make love in this action, then it becomes the culmination of what we've already built in the way of a community between one another. So here we go again. Sexiness has very little to do with looks. It has to do with our being at home in our own skin. And when we talk about, there are people who have non-erotic motives for getting involved in sexual activity, but those can then seriously damage or erode a relationship. The high school girl who gives her body to some high school boy because that's the way she's going to keep him generally isn't enjoying the activity. I've counseled too many of them. But she thinks that's the way she's going to keep him. So the sexual act is not a love-making act, it's a bribe. There are husbands and wives who try to bribe one another that way, or withhold sex because he didn't buy me the new car, so I'll fix him. It's like the silent treatment, you know. Except instead of shutting up my mouth, I shut up elsewhere. You know, we're a chastity belt of some sort. But if the normal sexual act between a couple expresses tenderness and caring and real lovemaking, then also, you see, when we have to forego that act because we're traveling or one of us is ill or whatever, we don't have a hydraulic view of sex, that there's going to be so much pressure it builds up and we've either got to use it or we'll blow up. It doesn't work that way. Not even for males does it work that way, no matter what you gals may have heard in high school. It never turns blue and falls off. It will not back up and kill him. There is no record in all of recorded history anywhere in the world of a human male ever dying of an unresolved erection. Left alone, it just limps away. Okay. Those are, okay, now, where were we? We're running short of time, I believe, and I want to be sure to touch upon a few points that I had down here. in a healthy person, then our spiritual relationship, our emotional relationship, where we're at with one another on those other intimate levels, enhances the sexual. And the sexual then becomes an expression of that and enhances the rest, you see. And if we're talking in terms of intimacy, then we're building up a regular communion. And sex as communion is unknown to too many people, I'm afraid. At least in my practice, when I talk to people about this, it's like sometimes I'm talking a foreign language to them. You know, they've segregated sex out as something that happens in the bedroom or someplace else. They've made it a cliche, or they've made it a routine, and it doesn't ever change. It doesn't happen, you know. And I'm not saying you're supposed to wrap yourself in cellophane and greet them at the front door, as I think it was Andrew Greeley years ago recommended. Advice from a celibate. I know many husbands, if their wife did that, why, he'd call the paddy wagon immediately and have her carted away. But I do mean that he still. Well, it's true. He wrote a book a few years ago, and that was one of the things. He wanted you to meet him at the door with wrapped in cellophane with a tray of martinis or some crazy thing. You know, I remember Myra laughing over that. Oh my. I said, I wonder if you're supposed to tie a ribbon around yourself or something. That fun and games aspect, though, too often is left out. Instead of people, actually making a date with one another. I've said again and again about people who've had an affair. If they put the energy they put into the affair into the marriage would be glorious. See? The marriage would really be fantastic. Because what are they doing? They're romancing somebody. They're actually fantasizing about somebody. They're sending little notes and cards, and they're phoning them at odd hours of the day, and they're, actually having a little love being made there during the day. See, and I think these things are always related. It's really critical to appreciate the fact that, you see, love is always sacred, but you can sure profane sex fast. See? Sex can be obscene. Love is never obscene. If it's real love, love is never obscene, never off color somehow. But sex can be. You can buy sex. Any street corner in this country you can buy, or around the world you can buy. Well, except Singapore. Singapore doesn't like that. Singapore is an interesting place. They'll get you for close proximity in Singapore. Close proximity is living with someone you're not married to. They'll fine you for that. They say Singapore is a fine city. It's got a fine for everything. But you can buy sex. You really can. Any variety of sex you want. You can buy it, but you can never buy love. Love is absolutely priceless. See? And it's really critical to appreciate that, because when we talk about sex and love, because love is always a gift. You can't coerce me into loving you. It's a free gift or it's nothing. You see, it's not. You can't grab it away from me somehow. I either give it to you or I don't. But love is that gift. Well, sex, you can, as I say, you can buy it. You can force people to have sex. That's what rape is. You see, and it's critical that you can live effectively without sex. We have a whole celibate tradition in the Western world and the Eastern world too, where people have done so, live very effective and beautiful lives without having genital activity. But you cannot live effectively or successfully without love. And or without some degree of intimacy somewhere, or you'll live a miserable life. And that's why it's so really important to make that distinction, and critical to make that distinction. Some of the troubles in troublesome areas I keep bumping into on a plane the other day, I was writing this down for your benefit, was that either there's no sexual activity going on in some marriages that I've dealt with, or the sexual activity is separated from lovemaking. Somehow there's no lovemaking, but they expect to have sex, or the sex is used for control purposes, or withheld as a punishment, or given as a reward, or it's become a routine, or there's a fear of sexual feelings. Ooh, yeah, if I feel sexy, gee, I may go out of control, then I'd be intimate. Or there's no pleasure in it for either party. Or one party wants more or less sexual activity than the other, and they can't talk about it, or don't talk about it until they get in and have a referee. I don't know if you saw the Woody Allen film, which had a split screen at one point, and it was Diane Keaton talking to her shrink, and she's saying, sex all the time, just all the time. I never get any relief from it. He's always demanding it. And right below is Woody Allen talking to his shrink, saying, never. We so seldom, probably 2-3 times a week. They're both talking about the same relationship, remember. And you get people who don't talk about it. So it really becomes critical in a marital relationship, if we're going to be expressing the highest movements of our spirit and our emotional involvement and our intimacy with another sexually, that we at least talk about it. And I don't mean before. Well, here we have the menu. Let's see, which position shall we use this evening? And we'll orchestrate this thing properly. Nor do I mean afterwards, how'd I do? A, B, or C, you know. Got a D. Gee, not up to par these days. But I mean it should have at least as much place in our dialogue with one another as where we're going on our vacation or a few other things. But most people are terrified about talking about it, and again, the reason is because our sexuality is so closely tied in with that whole sense of our personal identity, with that me that's at the center of the core of those circles I drew earlier today. That me that's there, because my identity is completely tied up in my sexuality and vice versa. I'm a man in the world, I'm not a woman in the world, and so on. So if you find me sexually inadequate, then you're going to reject me, the whole me. And yet, it really becomes critical that we be able to learn to dialogue on this level, not in terms of you don't do this or you don't do that, but in terms of what I'm comfortable with. And I have again and again had to give my clients exercises in which they say, you know, when we're making love, I'd really appreciate it if, or I really feel close to you when we do thus and so, or you know, da-da-da, and to talk openly with one another about that. And for some of them, that's a very freeing and very intimate experience. But otherwise, what are they doing? They're mind reading all the time. And they often miss. See? And they end up doing things that they didn't necessarily want to do, and find out later their partner wasn't that interested either, and, you know, they keep missing. There aren't that many mind readers around. And it's really critical to appreciate the fact that I don't know where you are unless you tell me, and I don't know, you know, whether you're delighted or not delighted unless you tell me, and so on and so forth. It's really a critical issue. Okay. By the way, everybody thinks they're abnormal. A couple of things I have to say before we finish all of this. One is, most people think they're the only person in the world from a dysfunctional family. I have found that the normal family is dysfunctional. That's item one. Two, everybody came from a dysfunctional family as far as I can figure out, including me. And two, I'm only being slightly facetious about that, so don't think you're oddball there. And two, that somehow I am the only cracked teacup in the set still prevails. It's really interesting. See, I have never met a woman in my life, in my practice, personal or otherwise, who felt her breasts were the right size. All women's breasts are the wrong size. They're either too large or they're too small, or this one's odd. You know. Now, that started back in puberty. And this is only, you know, as if their breasts, and this is why some women who have had the tragedy of a mastectomy and so on, really make it even more tragic by virtue of thinking they're robbed of their femininity because they've lost a breast or two. That's sheer nonsense, you see. It has nothing to do with their personhood, really. And we have to help them through that. But, or my husband won't love me because I don't have this. Men, on the other hand, right from the time they got into puberty, they weren't the right size. They were looking over the urinal to see. Never the right size, never the right size. Or if they had, you know, communal showers, they were never the right size. Everybody else was adequate, but not them. Men worry until age 42 and a half. They worry about the dang thing being the wrong size. As if that mattered, see? After 42 and a half, they worry about why it won't work like it's supposed to. Now, you think I'm kidding, but we have I don't know where they get these surveys, but we have surveys on that. Literally, we have surveys. Men up until about age 40-something worry about penis size, as if that mattered in terms of lovemaking. It doesn't. It really doesn't. You know, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Besides, most men are all the same size. They don't know that, but they are. Yeah. There's a sort of bell curve, and most of them, yeah, they're the same size. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wish they'd forget about those things. If we want to have conditions for true intimacy, then here are some of them. One is a willingness to receive, to be open to the other person as he or she is in themselves, not as we're demanding that they be or as we project upon them. Because the moment I'm open to you as you are, I'm open to accepting more love in my life, to enjoy more freedom, more personhood, which also means more God, because God is in all of us. This openness may involve letting go in terms of a lot of nonsense from the past. And you remember the old rabbinical tale of the guy who fell off the cliff and happened to catch a branch that was hanging out there? And he said, "Lord, save me." And the deep booming voice from heaven said, "Let go." A long pause. And the man looked up and said, "Anybody else up there?" You know? But it does mean letting go of a lot of nonsense out of our past. And then the second one is honesty and trust. And I've already mentioned the matter of infidelity and so on. If we're going to have a loving relationship, we have to be able to trust one another. I have to trust you to mean what you say. I have to trust you that you're not going to drop me if I give myself away to you. And fidelity ties right into that. Because if we don't have a commitment into the future, if it's all tentative, then I'm stuck with the situations we were talking about earlier today, where I'm stuck with people who run that script right up until the third act and then cut it off because they don't want to ad-lib, and they run that script on somebody else again and again. We need, if we're going to build an intimate communication, especially the married state, then we have to have this commitment into the future. That's what it's about. And I think we tend to overlook a couple of things that are very basic to communication and intimacy, and that is just basic courtesy and kindness to one another. You'd be surprised how few people in families tend to be courteous or kind to one another or say thank you on a regular basis, and it goes a long way just to have that kind of thing. I know of a couple, I had admired them for many, many years. She's died a couple of years ago. She was a dear friend of my late wife's, Myra's friend, who her husband, every dinner time, wherever they were, he always pulled the chair out for her and sat her down and gave her a kiss on the forehead before he went to sit down. Always. Now, you may think that was a routine, but his kids, you know, who grew up around that table, that courtesy, that general act of courtesy between them, it was just a remarkable thing to see always, because it was absolutely sincere. You knew there was nothing phony about it, and it was built in, that kind of courtesy. And I think that kind of courtesy we need more of, and it also goes out to the kids. Carl Jung once said that the meeting of two personalities is like the content or the contact of two chemical substances. That when you, if there is any reaction at all, then both are transformed. And in intimacy, when we have intimate communication with somebody, there's an immediate transformation that takes place, a gift giving that goes on, including the doubling of my vision of the world, my ability to see further than I could before. One of my dearest friends is a young woman in Minneapolis area who is an artist. And one day we were at the Calder exhibit. Whenever I go there, we have dinner together and we go see an exhibit or something. And she's a first-class artist. And I was looking at Calder, the sculptor, had done a lot of other stuff, including artifacts and little belt buckles and things like that. And I was looking at a belt buckle he had done, and she was over at some other place looking at another thing. And I called her over and I said, "Did you see this belt buckle?" She came over and she said, "No, I was looking at the little strands of silver wire that held up that lucite tray." She was an abstract painter at the time. And I said, "Oh," and I looked at that. And about a half an hour later, when we were driving to her home, to her parents' home for dinner, I started to laugh because I couldn't remember what the belt buckle looked like, but I could remember what those wires looked like attached to the other thing. And I hadn't even noticed those before. And in real intimacy, it's that kind of mutual enriching that goes on, you know, of our sharing the vision in that way, and that mutual support that we mentioned earlier. And it keeps coming back always to the matter of being present for one another, and the matter of our risk-taking with one another in opening up, letting down some of those barriers to intimacy we mentioned in the first talk, trying to be really me with you, and letting you be you with me without judging you, without pushing you back into some role. It's really critical that we appreciate all that. Because ultimately what we're aiming for is that knowledge of one another that we can never fully achieve until heaven. You know, the reason there's no giving or taking in marriage in heaven, which scares the blazes out of married couples who love one another, is that they misunderstand that. See, in a marital relationship, which is the ultimate intimacy in terms of human loving, in that committed relationship, we're always striving to get to know the other, but we never do. See, it's always beyond our grasp just slightly because we're mysteries. Now, when I was in grammar school and you asked a particularly embarrassing question of the nun, like, what's sex, sister? She'd say, that's a mystery, which meant shut up. See, that was ecclesiastical jargon for shut up. Well, I don't mean mystery in that way. I mean mystery is something you can live in, something you experience, something you ponder, something you study, something you come to things like this about, and all you know still does not exhaust its meaningfulness. It's always got more to it. Well, the same thing goes for the mystery of personhood. There's no day on which we know ourselves that thoroughly or know the other. So in marriage, we're constantly striving towards that knowledge, but it's only in heaven when we're all married to everybody else. Because that's what it is. We're all one body. It's only in heaven, in the grand vision of that we all know one another completely. And that's why we don't have to get married in heaven, because we're all married. Does that make sense to you? Yeah, in that sense of knowing one another, of being intimate with one another. And that building of that sort of community is what we're striving for all the time. I'm going to say something to you that's a little offbeat now. I want to share with you a Christmas card of 2 years ago, because if I don't put it here, I'll feel badly about it for not sharing it with you. I sent this, every year I find, when I run across something that, I want to conclude with this, I run across something that I like, I try to share it with my mailing list. And when we talk about building community and building intimacy, this one is very close to my heart. And taking care of the world, fathering forth or mothering forth the children of the world, no matter whether we're celibate, single, widowed, married, or what. And I want to share this with you. This was sent out, it was written by a woman named Ina Hughes, whom I don't know, and it was published in a very small circulation publication that goes out to specialists in family life work. We are responsible for children who put chocolate fingers everywhere, who like to be tickled, who stomp in puddles and ruin their new pants, who sneak popsicles before supper, who erase holes in math workbooks, who can never find their shoes. And we are responsible for those who stare at photographers from behind barbed wire, who can't bound down the street in a new pair of sneakers, who never counted potatoes, who are born in places we wouldn't be caught dead, who never got to the circus, who live in an X-rated world. We're responsible for children who bring us sticky kisses and fistfuls of dandelions, who sleep with the dog and bury goldfish, who hug us in a hurry and forget their lunch money, who cover themselves with Band-Aids and sing off-key, who squeeze toothpaste over the sink, who slurp their soup. And we are responsible for those who never get dessert, who have no safe blanket to drag behind them, who watch their parents watch them die, who can't find any bread to steal, who don't have any rooms to clean up, and whose pictures aren't on anybody's dresser, whose monsters are real. And we are responsible for children who spend all their allowance before Tuesday, who throw tantrums in the grocery store and pick at their food, who like ghost stories, who shove dirty clothes under the bed and never rinse out the tub, who get visits from the tooth fairy, who don't like to be kissed in front of the carpool, who squirm in church and scream in the phone, whose tears we sometimes laugh at, and whose smiles can make us cry. And we are responsible for those whose nightmares come in the daytime, who will eat anything, who have never seen a dentist, who aren't spoiled by anybody, who go to bed hungry and cry themselves to sleep, who live and move but have no being. We are responsible for children who want to be carried and for those who must, for those we never give up on, and for those who don't get a second chance, for those we smother, and for those who will grab any hand kind enough to offer it. In talking about intimacy, we are all in one family. In building up that family of one another, we're all involved in the same task. And hopefully, in building that family, we're going to cease being a collective of people who just happen to be gathered in the same place and become a community where we get to know and love one another better and better all the time. I want to thank all of you for the great attention you've shown me. Attention is a basic sign of love, and I deeply appreciate your being here and sharing this time with me. Thank you. I love you too.